Now, we all know, we all know this, that men and women generally can be rather different. We interpret things in different ways, and oftentimes, given the situation as a whole, men and women will react very differently, okay? On Mondays evenings this last month, I've been teaching a class, and someone posed the question in class that was fantastic, and it got me thinking. Miss Southern asked, why weren't there any women at the Last Supper? And that really got me thinking. And if you look at the course of events that happened over Good Friday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday, we see kind of a different reaction between men and women. Okay? The men that are depicted are like klutz, hard-headed, but very faithful, and want to be men of action, but yet at times seem to stumble over their own 2 feet. The women are a little more reserved, but yet their coming to faith seems a little more instant. So let's go through the events that occurred. Obviously, on Holy Thursday, on the night of that Last Supper, Jesus was seated with a band of his chosen men, and they go and they have that Passover meal together. And as they are gathered on the night of that Last Supper, Jesus becomes very frank with them. He says, one of you is going to betray me, the one who dips his bread into the plate. Moments later, guess who dips his bread? Judas. Our Lord makes it fairly obvious. Similarly, Peter. Our Lord says, one of you will deny me thrice. And what does Peter say in response? Not I, Lord. Not I, Lord. And then what happens a few hours later? He goes and he denies our Lord 3 times. Okay? And then by the end of that night, as our Lord gets hauled off to the high court, all the guys scatter. They get scared, overwhelmed perhaps, and they scatter. We get to the events of Good Friday, and as we go through the stations of the cross, you will see that you don't see any of the disciples. And the people you do see at this point are relative strangers. Simon of Cyrene's the one who has to help carry the cross, and he really doesn't even know who the Lord is too well. You have Veronica who goes and she wipes the brow of Jesus' face that is covered in blood and sweat. We have the women who are weeping along the way. And then we get to the 12th station. And at this 12th station, we see 3 women at the foot of the cross, right? Mary, the mother of God, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. Although the men got to spend the Last Supper with our Lord, it is these 3 ladies who come to the foot of the cross. And then before our Lord expires on the cross, guess who shows up? John, just in the nick of time. And then we get to Easter Sunday, and we see Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene go to the tomb. And as they enter into the tomb, they see the Lord. They see that it is empty. And our Lord is present there in the corner, wrapped in a white garment. And at first, who do the ladies think that he is? The gardener. And they go up to him and they say, where have you placed him? Please tell us, and we will go get him. And the second our Lord speaks, what happens? They get it. They realize that it's the Lord. And what do they refer to Jesus as? Rabboni, meaning teacher. Their acknowledgement of the resurrected Christ happens almost instantaneously. Now, we find ourselves later that day on the road to Emmaus. And we see 2 gentlemen walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And we see Cleopas, who is obviously the husband of Mary. And we know that they've been conversing, because the gospel tells us that. So Cleopas is not unaware of the events that happened that morning, but yet he's still overwhelmed with emotion. He's still overwhelmed, and he just gets so caught up in his own emotion that he cannot see who is talking to him. So going on to the road to Emmaus, our Lord appears to them. But the men have become so hard-headed because their emotion has made them stuck in their ways, because they think that the Lord is dead. And although they have been given glimpses and his wife has already seen the resurrected Lord, they still cannot believe because they cannot get it through their heads. And so the Lord is extremely patient with them. And he goes to them and he realizes that they can't recognize him. And then they kind of talk to Jesus as if Jesus is an idiot. They go up to him and they say, "How do you not know of the things that have taken place here in Jerusalem over these last days?" Like, how do you not know that? And Jesus responds, "What sort of things?" And he makes them explain it. This is key. He makes them explain what happened. And then they give a summary of who Jesus is, which by being able to articulate it, they're acknowledging that they know intellectually who Jesus is. They get it. But yet they just cannot make that jump between the heart and the head. So our Lord lets them explain. And then our Lord becomes very frank with them. And he says, "Let me get this straight. I'm here talking to you. Your wife saw me this morning in the tomb and has reported everything that has happened. And you still don't get it. Because the coming to faith is harder for them. Unlike the ladies who can see the Lord and instantly get it. These gentlemen, because of the emotion, because of the stress, because of the frustration, the connection between the heart and the head, at least temporarily, is broken. And our Lord says to them very bluntly, "How foolish are you? How slow of heart are you to believe that what of all the prophets spoke? Was it not necessary that Christ should have to suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And then our Lord began to teach them. And it wasn't brief. It clearly states that the Lord, beginning with Moses, all the way to the last prophet, began to interpret to them and refer to them what occurred in all the scriptures. And it is at dusk that they finish this. And after spending most of the day with the Lord, they don't quite see it yet. They haven't had that acknowledgement of faith. Because you know what they need? They don't just need to hear it. Because you can hear the word, the Lord talk to you constantly, and I promise you, some of you still won't get it. You know what you need? You know what these men needed? Action. And so the Lord comes and he says, he does, 4 distinct verbs. What is a verb? An action word. And the Lord takes, he blesses, he breaks, and he gives it to them. He does an action. And it is through the action that their eyes were opened and they began to recognize him. Granted, we're all different, and I think it's very interesting how the scriptures make a very clear contrast between the coming to acknowledge the resurrected Lord between the men and the women. But granted, these apply to all of us. Sometimes our emotion gets us so overwhelmed that we cannot see the Lord when he is talking to us directly to our face. And then we go and we want more from him. And then as the Lord did on the road to Emmaus, very patiently, mind you, he explained to them all the scriptures. But it wasn't until the call to action, it wasn't until the Lord did something that their eyes began to see who they were encountering. And so our Lord sometimes needs to act for us. We have to be aware of not just what he says, but what he is doing. And it's through the acknowledgement of that action that we ourselves can come to faith. And I hope and pray that in the times of our disbelief, or in our struggles, or when our eyes are blinded and we simply cannot see, I hope and pray that the Lord is as blunt with you as he was with these gentlemen en route to Emmaus. And I hope and I pray that he tells you the truth. And he says, "You fool! You fool! How are you so slow to heart?" Mind you, they obviously understand because they just explained everything. Intellectually, they get it. That's not a problem. How slow of heart are you to believe all that the prophets spoke to you? You can't explain you can explain lots of things, but explanation will not necessarily yield conversion of heart. Explanation's true, don't get me wrong. We believe in a faith that is reasonable. We can give logic to an awful lot of what we believe. But that logic's not sufficient to change your heart. It requires action. For the Lord took, he blessed, he broke, and he gave. And from that action, their eyes were open. And finally, they could recognize who he was.